This week, the week of September 18th, 2023, is the week of the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Summit in New York City. Why is this important? Well, it's because it's officially the halfway mark since the 2030 SDG goals were put into place. For today's episode, I thought it was just the right time to speak to not only a good friend of mine, but also a trailblazing advocate for the SDGs. Her name is Rachel Svetanoff, and in this conversation, we're going to look at the Sustainable Development Goals from a beginner's lens. What are they? What do they represent? And what we can do as a collective to do and be better. And I also get her honest opinion of just how well we're doing to reach the 17 goals by the year 2030. Here's a little bit about Rachel. Rachel is a youth activist and social entrepreneur with a history of supporting efforts to meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, contributing to over 100 projects with 112 organizations across 35 countries. In May 2023, Rachel was selected to become a visiting associate of policy and practice at the University of Notre Dame, where she received her master's in global health. Rachel co-founded the youth organization Global Futurist Initiative and founded the Project Energy for Life Cameroon Consortium. She also started her own consulting practice as well. She's worked at UNICEF USA, Johnson & Johnson, Eli Lilly and Company, and Purdue University. Receiving numerous appointments and over 30 awards, Rachel is a sought-out speaker and actively contributes to published works on matters concerning youth, sustainable development, and human rights. Thanks for being here. My name is Ethel Bauman, and this is the Global Health Pursuit. Rachel, hi, how are you doing?
Good.
Oh my God. We were just talking right before I hit record, and I was like, I'm thinking, I've been trying to get Rachel on the podcast for so long, keeps getting delayed. Rachel has all of these amazing things in the pipeline, and I'm like, let's just talk. The Sustainable Development Goal Summit is coming up. Actually, when I release this episode, it'll be that week of the summit. So it'll be great timing for you guys to listen to this episode. But I think on this episode, I really want to talk to Rachel about kind of her journey. I was thinking about this today, Rachel, where people in my life, a lot of people in my life, they don't even know what the word or what the term SDG is. I was telling my fiance, oh yeah, I was talking to somebody about the SDG Summit that was coming up. And he's like, what's SDG? And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is something that almost, I think every single company that's running in this world should know, right? However small, however big. But that's something that I think we need to talk about today. I think we need to talk about how to get more youth involved in the goals, and just kind of, I was just telling her, I was like, let's just shoot the shit. Let us just talk about what is going on. So Rachel, enough talking on my end. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of a little bit about your journey to how you got to where you are today?
Sure. And thank you so much for the introduction. I think it has been very long overdue since I've been on the podcast, at least by myself. I do recall that when we had Global Health Pursuits, that Lumbi Malombo from JB Dondolo and I were doing this together. So it's really nice
Yes.
to to come back and to be part of this in a way that it captures, in some ways, access to clean water, but also expanding it to all matters of the betterment of the quality of life for people and our inhabitants of the earth. So in that way, and
inhabitants of the earth, I love how you say that.
Yeah,
because that's not just human, right? That's not just human. That's plants, animals.
Exactly. It is. Well, we're stewards of the earth, and whether it is protecting our oceans or the land itself or even the air quality, we're all connected, and we all need to think of ourselves as that connective tissue to it all, because we are, the most cognitive and cognizant species. So it's really good to see, like how a lot of people have come together and have brought on this collective action and individual responsibility, in the way that, inspired the blueprint for the Sustainable Development Goals. But to capture a little bit about my eclectic background, as everybody likes to say.
I love it.
It really is like almost inspired by the SDGs, not on purpose, but just because like I love helping and being able to be part of like various social environmental causes, from championing, like just helping to help in my local community with like different shelters or food assistance programs, to the more globally thinking system strengthening of healthcare. It's about living life to the fullest, and that's the way that I feel that I really do that. So I'd like to I guess my tagline is I've worked to contribute to all 17 Sustainable Development Goals across 37 countries with over 110 organizations. But
that's the spiel.
Yeah, that's the quick tagline, but really it's just about being present, because I know that, through, I guess, my lived experience, that while I cannot change the past, I can always do the most today for a better tomorrow. That's, more philosophical background, but, it's very much like who I am through and through, all the same.
It definitely, I think, captures your essence. One question I wanted to ask you was, there's always some type of event or situation that happens in people's lives that kind of turns almost their compass to a specific direction, right? And I know that your background educationally is within global health and public health. What brought you was there a specific time in your life that was like, you know what? That's actually what's calling my soul. That's actually what I want to do. Because in my experience, for me, my background is my family is from India. I have a South Asian background. I really didn't think about, quote unquote, the Sustainable Development Goals, the poverty alleviation, what's going on in the world, climate change, all of that stuff until way later on in life. And that was like post getting my engineering degrees. That was post, doing the work that I thought that I had to do to kind of just move up in life. Just, living the matrix life, literally like doing what my parents were telling me to do and thinking that that's just going to be how I live my life, right? And for me, starting this podcast, it was like the first experience that I had was when I went back to India and actually understood, hey, oh my gosh, there's a big city here, but then there's a wall that kind of just divides the poor people with high capitalism and businesses and all of that. And then that's kind of my first experience that started all of the questions I had, right? It made me kind of snowball into somebody that just wanted to ask questions. And then obviously this podcast happened so that I could facilitate those questions. And so I wanted to ask you, was there an experience or a situation or something that happened to in your life that kind of led you down this path that tell you, that where you said, okay, I'm going to study a master's in global health because this is what I'm passionate about. And this is why.
Oh,
that was so long-winded. Like, I feel like I need to edit that out, but I think I might just keep it because this is funny because like when you're listening to this podcast, if you're listening right now, like this is very different from all the other episodes because I just feel Rachel's my friend, even though we've never met in person, like we are friends. And so this is just, it's going to feel like that.
Exactly. No, it's very much like I refer to these as like tea times.
Oh, so, yes.
For afternoon tea. But
I actually have my tea with me right now.
Oh, I wish I had one. I have like a cup to like, personify it. So this is the closest I got. But it's empty right now. I should have some water on me or something. And normally I do, but whatever. It's been a day. Yeah, no, but I really appreciate your question. And it's a question I get asked all too often because it's almost in some ways a validating question and also a question that almost has to have some sort of logic behind it. And in some ways, I feel that my answer defies it. Like there wasn't no singular point. I can go through, the story of my life, in a way that encaptures, okay, I guess like, this builds up to that, but I almost feel that life is a journey and even my professional career is a journey and that changes over time. It's not necessarily binary between, oh, this is the path and this is what you're going to do. And in a way that's like, this was, your choice or your parents' choice and, that's it. For me, I can at least give you like, some real in that when I was in college, my dad unexpectedly passed away when I was a freshman. And that altered the course of who I thought I was going to be. I would say that, but that didn't mean that like I knew where I was going. I know that.
Did we ever know where were we going? Like I didn't know where I was going when I was in college. I was like, I'm just going to take these classes because apparently my curriculum says that I need to take these classes, so I'm just going to do it. Like,
yeah, right. Like, but I see some young people and leaders today that like they knew exactly what they're going to be and they went out and did it, and I applaud them. And it's always inspiring to see that, from our generations before us to what we see after too, and our successors, for the world to come. And it's always amazing to see. And in my case, I guess it wasn't amazing per se. When I had that, like, that change, because not only did my dad pass away, I was, from that, it was a traumatic loss. So I was struggling with grades and this and that and the other, right after my dad passed away, not but a year later, like we were forced to sell our house. And so we were even homeless for a few months. That's happened to me twice, to where, in terms of homelessness, or should I say at least houselessness. Yeah, we were living in a hotel room for at least 3 months, I remember. And if it wasn't for the fact that we were in college, to have a place to go back to in terms of student dormitories, I don't know what we would have done. Honestly, to this day, I can't even think about it because it wasn't an outcome that actually happened. So it's not going to be, worth over analyzing, but,
all the what ifs.
Oh yeah, exactly. All the what ifs. But one of those, outcomes was I did terrible on the MCAT. So much like I'm sure you have experienced, or your friends. I
didn't even bother taking the MCAT. I was like, that's not happening. No.
Yeah, I remember I was studying in the hotel room for the MCAT, and I was actually shifting from place to place, from my friend's house to my uncle's house to the hotel room, trying to take this MCAT, and I did awful. I'm pretty sure my score was an 18. So
and the score is out of what, 30 something?
Yeah, out of 37, or actually it was out of 45 at the time.
Okay.
So, it was astronomically terrible. And yeah, that is where I was like, okay, obviously I'm not going to get into medical school right after undergraduate. I need to do something in a way that still facilitates that parental guidance, like to lightly say, of you're going to be a doctor, do things that I think that I can potentially do with myself, that can help me get to the next chapter. And I literally, senior year, did not know what public health or global health was until I stumbled into my pre-med advisor's office at my school, to which there was only one that served 40,000 students at the time. So, I mean, yeah, now that alone is something. But in terms of like just finding, and how I became myself, I guess, like it was just randomly when I just was there, and I said, hey, this is, what do I do from here? And she's like, well, there's public health and there's post-baccalaureate programs. And I'm like, what's public health? And so she explained to me what it was. And I'm like, cool. All right. I'm gonna go do that. It sounds good enough. Because I distinctly remember asking, between a post-bac program versus a public health master's, which one is like a better, fallback? She said public health. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna do that one then. So I only applied to 2 schools. That was, and the audacity that I had at the time to apply to Yale and Notre Dame. I still don't know how or why, but those are the only 2 schools I applied to, and I got into Notre Dame, and that was one of my other dream schools I wanted to go to when I was an undergrad. So it was a little bit of a full circle moment. So yeah, that's kind of, and then when I was in my program, I absolutely fell in love with how public health and global health, more specifically, because the Notre Dame's Master of Science in Global Health program is a very research-intensive, scientific-based approach to global health. I fell in love with everything that they were teaching us, and in a way that I was like, okay, I don't want to do one-on-one direct patient interaction or go to medical school. I love big projects. I love seeing the interconnections and the connective tissue between global health, development, poverty, and what eventually became the SDGs, because the year that I went to school was in 2014, when they were just about to release the SDGs for the first time. Yeah. So it was an extraordinarily coincidental time to be there and hear from my professors talk about how they are about to release, because a lot of these professors were adjunct faculty that had appointments at the CDC and at the World Health Organization. They had different backgrounds themselves that weren't the traditional academic path, although of course we had those as well for different classes. But in any case, that it was really interesting and exciting to hear. And we were taught in I remember in Global Health Challenges class about the Millennium Development Goals and how they were about to become the Sustainable Development Goals. But since they weren't released, not everything is certain yet in terms of what they look like or anything. But I actually genuinely remember that moment. And so yeah, it's very much ingrained in my brain and just sparked my interest. And since then, what inspired me really, or what should I say attracted me to the SDGs, are the colors. I just love colors. That's just who I am. Literally, I loved coloring when I was a child. And I love pretty colors and sparkly bright things. It's that simple. There's
oh my God.
Trauma meets glitter.
That is so funny. Well, okay, so you were literally there when you were in school right before they they developed the Sustainable Development Goals. So you were basically right on the forefront of everything that was happening. And like you, I also didn't know what public health was. I didn't know what global health was probably until the last 6 or 7 years. That's something that I never really was exposed to at that time. And engineering was my fallback. I remember you said, what's a good fallback? Should I do public health? Should I do this post-bac? Do the public health. And it's really interesting how your journey kind of got diverted from pursuing the whole medical profession to public health, just because of asking that question of like, what should I do? Because I know that I'm not going to go to medical school. I got 18 on my I don't know what you actually got, but I know the feeling, I know the feeling. I never even knew about engineering. Like, I didn't even think about engineering before going to college because
that's so funny. Like,
yeah, I'm 18. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't want to study bio or chem because I'm not sure what I'm going to do with those degrees after college. So what's a better degree to get? And literally just logicked it out in my mind. And I just did that. So it's so funny how like the universe just guided you into this field that you're actually so passionate about. And in a similar way, I've been guided kind of out of engineering. And I'm using the skill sets I've learned from my engineering degree in doing this podcast, in asking these questions to people. It's just so interesting. Okay, so SDGs. Can you explain what do the Sustainable Development Goals mean? And why were they created? For someone who is listening to the podcast, and like if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, oh, I actually never really even knew about the SDGs. Can you explain to to our listeners, like, what does this mean?
Sure, yeah. So to answer directly first, and then to actually, go back to that engineering part, because there's a funny story. The Sustainable Development Goals are a blueprint literally to better improve the quality of life for the world. And I mean the world. So that includes whether that is stewarding, for plants, for flora, for fauna, for all life, and even for the ecosystems that are driven by the earth itself. It is essentially all of that combined into this framework categorized by 17 goals that each have their own set of targets and indicators, to which there are 169 targets to measure against for this improvement overall as a matter of transparency, accountability, and cooperation. So through the 17 goals, to which I actually can list them out by memory, they deal at various standpoints between poverty to global equality, economic prosperity, national, or I should I say international and national security, various social and environmental and economic causes that entail with meeting, to the end of that betterment. So in that way, it has been adopted by all 193 members of the United Nations back in 2015 through the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, to which this year, 2023, we are at its midpoint, to which there are only 7 years left for the world to achieve these goals.
Now, I was reading on the UN.org. So I was doing some just digging online, and it's just interesting because what they say is the agenda is a promise, but not a guarantee. At the halfway mark, the promise is in deep peril. For the first time in decades, development progress is reversing under the combined impacts of climate disasters, conflict, economic downturn, and lingering COVID-19 effects. The SDG Summit serves as a rallying cry to recharge momentum for world leaders to come together, reflect on where we stand, and resolve to do more. So that's kind of, that's the agenda for the summit that is happening, in September, the week that we're releasing this. And I wanted to ask you, like, what are your thoughts on being at the halfway point, seeing what we've done as the UN from the beginning of this, right? From the beginning at 2015.
Sure. I mean, So the way that I would frame this, and particularly like something that I also want to touch upon, just to like, for the sake of this podcast being like a global health issue, and demonstrating like how health for humanity is. And actually, there's a new term called One Health, which is the health of people, planet, and I think it's animals. It's like population health. It's becoming like its own like subcategory within population health, which is a subcategory within like public and global health. But in any case, it very much like encaptures the essence of the global goals. And of course, good health and well-being, which is SDG 3, is certainly a part of the sustainable development goals. So I just wanted to back up quickly about that. But like in the way that you asked about, we are at the midpoint, we have these impeding crises, what do we do? Or like, where do we begin? And as somebody who has been an activist in this space for a number of years now, honestly, probably since I learned about them back in 2015, there was a part of me that was, advocating for them even as a student. The honest answer to that is just that we just need to be out of our own way, to get out of our own way. Nobody else is causing climate change. I don't see, bears or wolves or whatever, thinking about this,
or plants.
Actually, they're trying to help.
Yeah.
It just comes down to us, and if we don't get out of our own way, then there really isn't a future. With the rise and the advent of AI, a lot of people are speculating that humans are going to evolve, through AI. But
in what sense, though? That's like really interesting point that you're saying. Like, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's really different between perspectives. At least from my own, I've thought about this like probably way before like the hype and the fray has started with like ChatGPT. I think that like really just like catapulted interest in AI, which is both good and it has its pros and cons. But for myself, I've always thought that, if we collectively, cease to exist as a species, I know that we're trying to mitigate that, and we should, try to continue that, of course, that AI is eventually going to develop like a sort of, cognizance or awareness at least, and go from there. And interestingly enough, refer to iRobot, even though everybody has a lot of problems with it based on the book and, Will Smith, whatever. Yeah. But like, I swear, like there's some modicum of truth in there. And that's what I go to. Like, I don't think of anything else really when I think of like the evolution of our species. Like, and it's in a way that still encaptures the humanity of, like what, the robots in that story undergo, because Sonny, at the end of the movie, comes to release all the old robots because, from being oppressed by, these like, mega Terminator ones. It was just really interesting. But like, I feel like, and I say feel because that's a distinct, like, human emotion.
It's like a metaphor for what's happening.
Yeah, that there's something there. And I just don't think that we're prepared to really know. And like with all things evolution, it just comes with time. It's almost like falling asleep, where it happens very slowly, but at the same time, all at once. So I feel, and I say I feel again, just because like I can't know, and I can't even speculate, because it's not like I, even charter anything relating to AI, at least right now. We'll see. My professional journey, if anything has taught me anything, it's just that it just goes wherever. Right. At this point, that it's going to be, it's just going to happen, and we'll be there when it does. So, and because I do think that it will happen like sometime within our lifetime, that we start to really see different ways of society, like kind of like formulating itself.
It's funny. I was just at home in New York, and I have my uncle and aunt from Georgia came up to visit us, and they were talking about some type of AI that was coming out that would allow for us to speak to our pets and to animals. Like it was like a translation service or something like that was basically powered by AI. And I'm like, what?
Well, they already can determine that trees speak to each other, and you can actually kind of speak through trees. Like this is like nothing. I just remember that there was a scientific study, and I could just be completely misinterpreting this, that you can hear like the music that trees produce. And I know that trees can at least warn each other that, like fire or something's coming. Doesn't mean that they can do anything about it, but that's
like
there is a
its
network
roots or something like that.
Yeah, that there's a network system. And that I can follow up with like in different articles, etc. But, to relate all this back to your question, what do you think of the goals, is that it almost seems like it is a blueprint for evolution of our society. Not evolution as in we're all going to be robots. Though, with AI rising, a lot of people in my fields are actually speculating that, technology needs to be, like further included in the goals. And at least SDG 17, there is a specific target, looking at how many people in the world can attain a broadband access to the internet affordably as well. So that's, one step in that direction. But the speculation of including AI or other technological advancements is becoming more and more at the forefront of the SDGs. So that is also like how it actually connects. I seem to feel that I'm like building up the punchline and not explaining what's
punching
behind the punchline. Yeah. So that's why I keep backtracking, because there's a method to my madness. I just tend to skip a beat. But yeah, no, when you ask, what do I think of the goals? I do think of them in mostly an optimistic way, but still cautious optimism, even though we have, these real urgent and dire crises. Maybe I'm just glass half full type of person, but yeah. I tend to think that we will prevail, that life always has a way to persist, and that perseverance is what's going to keep us going at the end of the day. Because specifically when you mentioned COVID as, a huge barrier to achievement and actually, even progressing backwards and backsliding against the targets and goals, we did find a way to overcome that challenge as a world, even though there were many setbacks and many challenges to getting there. A vaccine was produced and it was mass distributed across the world. Now, of course, there's, these are extremely broad strokes. It's like taking, a whale and trying to fit a whale into a pinhole in terms of all of the, I don't know. I don't have any other better.
A whale in a pinhole.
I don't know.
Rachel Svetanoff, everyone.
Amazing. Great soundbite.
Oh my God, we better make a clip off of this.
But just to finish, is that even though this is extremely broad strokes of, this optimism, and we have all these issues of equity, in terms of why, some countries receive vaccine doses versus others. But at the end of the day, and the way that it relates to COVID in general, is that while there are these barriers, there have also been successes. Right. And that success and that persistence is what's going to help us continue and to hopefully actually thrive instead of only survive.
That's a really good way of putting it. Thrive instead of only survive. Yeah. So I want to pivot and talk about, I wanted to talk about the youth assembly that you were just at just a couple weeks ago. I'm recording this. Talk about the importance of that and what went on over there.
Yeah, no, would love to. And the way that it relates to the SDGs as well is that the Youth Assembly is put on by the formerly known as American Field Service, but just known today as AFS Intercultural Programs, to gather the world's young leaders that are making a difference for the communities based upon achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And I was very honored enough to be selected as a finalist for the AFS Young Global Citizen Award among 6 other candidates. And as the only American among the finalists, it was doubly an honor in that way. And it hasn't even been the first time that I was the only American involved with different like fellowship opportunities, etc. But it was still meaningful in a way that while I was the only American, I was also representing a community that is near and dear to me. And of course, one of your previous guests on the podcast, it's Elvis Nandatsi, and of course, the Cameroonian community that we are helping through the Project Energy for Life Cameroon Consortium. So it was through that project, and especially to meet SDG 7, 3, and 8, which is clean energy, good health, and economic inclusion, that I was able to showcase and really highlight, the way that the Cameroonian community has uplifted itself, as well as showcase, community-centered leadership. And to be able to be part of that was truly remarkable. And also celebrating the International Youth Day at the UN headquarters was the cherry on top. And reconnecting with many of my United Nations Association of the USA members and colleagues was even more spectacular. It's the sprinkles.
Sprinkles on top.
Awesome Sunday. Yeah. And it was great. All around, it was fantastic. And I was really lucky to also have my co-founder from Global Futures Initiative there as part of the Youth Assembly, and able to speak to one of the panels about education, what really matters in the world, was the panel that I was serving on. So yeah, I got to highlight many different angles of the work that I do, explaining a little bit of the eclectic style of my professional journey, but it all relates to helping achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And the way that, and it actually reminds me of last night where I was on a call with the United States Global Leadership Coalition Next Generation Fellows Program. And through that, we were asked a number of questions about pretending that you are part of the model UN. What would you do in this situation when developing a relationship with another country? And we talked about how we can do that through environmental protection as a core focus area, and how youth are the mobilizers of environmental protection, but also the mobilizers and accountability holders for the global goals. And that's what was also just really nice to be able to make that connection that did not actually come from me, or, first at least.
Yeah. I
was really glad to, and just it just felt good to hear other people mention that without me having to beat on my drum type of thing. So that was really a nice finalization of what it captured this month, in terms of the ability to see youth collectively, and I do mean collectively, a lot of young people don't see borders or these differences in a way that prevents them from interacting and trying to engage diplomatically and in a way that aligns with the interests of the global goals. That has been inspiring, but also always a fresh perspective, a breath of fresh air.
Have you seen a big difference between the generations in bringing upon action within the Sustainable Development Goals? If I were to compare millennial to Gen Z, what do you see? Because you're on the forefront, right? What are your thoughts on that?
I do think that, at least in terms of operationalizing the SDGs, that millennials, Gen Z, and, likely to see this from, Gen Alpha, that we're going to see a much more environmentally conscious or socially conscious group almost intuitively, as opposed to having to be taught that.
I mean, I also think that social media has a huge implication in that too, right? Because when somebody, I mean, in my mind, I feel like Gen Z, if they feel like super passionate about something, it's all over the place. You know, it is like you scroll on TikTok and you see it, you know? So it's like almost utilizing social media for good. And I've seen that a lot more within the younger generations.
Yes, definitely. But one thing to keep in mind is that I do think that when we were younger, the millennial generation is just, it's fascinating. It's fascinating in its own ways, because I feel that there are like micro, generations within the millennial
Within
generation.
it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And maybe like other people feel that way too, that there's more like, they call it, I think there's zillennials, but like with an X, and then there's millennials, like true millennial, and then there's like zillennials with a Z. And I even think that there's a little bit of in between all of those as well. And some people have been able to really capture that, like almost a year by year difference. And maybe that's just because we are millennials, so we understand, like our generation best. But it almost seems that, the micro generation within this generation, there's I think that there is some validity there. And with social media profligating that and continuously building up in a way that expands our collective consciousness, as well as almost like holds us accountable in some ways.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whether that's because there's the cancel culture term. And there's some merit behind that, that actually came out of the Me Too movement to, really put forth, what sexual harassment is like in the workplace originally. But the way that it is also, like just in everyday life, like the gender-based violence that, mostly women and girls face. And not to discredit, that, men feel that way, or that anybody else feels that way, not even to categorize it binarily, but just the way that sexual harassment is and how it's like not okay in general. That we see social media facilitate that also collects the, proverbial receipts. It's proof, it's evidence. And that's because like our justice system collectively isn't perfect, but where we see evidence, that's what always builds up, for, making that case and to making like, real action happen. And that's why, and the way that this relates to the goals, is that the action of, like always having evidence and data driven measures to show that what is being done is actually being done is pivotal to everything that we're doing. So I can definitely see like and understand why you would ask about social media, because of the almost new way of community that is formed on there. And it almost seems that in some cases there's a disconnect between how some people like interact in the real world versus like how they are virtually, which is why, and this almost goes down too deep into a rabbit hole, but a rabbit hole nonetheless worth exploring sometimes, that with this different way of developing your persona, that this digital essence of yourself, and that is becoming more important just from the sake of like privacy or data collection, or like all of those pieces of information that make up who you are. It digitally does affect real life outcomes too, which is also just very interesting, but also like has its consequences. I will say to wrap that up is that, because you asked like, how social media is, propagated like through youth and the way that youth respond to the global goals.
Yes.
And why they are the driving mechanism is because intuitively, since they are so adept at social media, they are building that evidence and almost like that citizen generated data to help facilitate real concrete actions, plans, strategies.
Yes.
To achieve the goals. Yeah. And to achieve, and I talk about the goals, collectively, to just also say that, of course, that in itself is like an extremely broad stroke yet again.
Right.
But to achieve different outcomes that improve health for people, that improve, job opportunities, or even improve like justice systems. Like there's so many different pieces of living, I say a day-to-day life that the social determinants of health, for example, have an influence on, what you consume and what you are putting out into the world.
It's also, I mean, I just keep remembering, the fires that just happened in Maui, right? Mm-hmm. Social media is where I learned about it. And I think that it's almost like an immediate rally, everyone comes out to help. And it's immediate, right? And I think it's just an amazing way that we're able to utilize social media to achieve those goals. I don't know. It's like, it's very, very interesting. And I think that I'm also like, I feel like I have a lot to learn too, in that sense.
There's just a lot to capture, just because like the way that I'm talking, I know is extremely high level. This is like my comfort zone per se, is like talking in this almost philosophical, but not quite manner, that tries to take also just an observational lens through the idea of humanity, which almost cannot be captured in complete, sense of rationale and logic, because, we are so in tune with feelings and emotions, that inspires, like, for example, that collective action through a crisis. But also, on the flip side of that, there's also compassion fatigue. And that is also a pervasive issue in global health and in sustainable development.
We could talk about that for a whole nother podcast episode. I'm going to tell you that.
For sure, because it's a lot. And I say a lot in a way that by saying it almost feels heavy coming out of my mouth. It feels that there's, this sense of overwhelming feeling that's like, clouding and like just like, becomes like
a doom and
something
gloom
heavy
kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But even a little bit more insidious is that you can't see it, but you can feel it. It's something just, almost like is already starting to make me like slouch.
Yeah.
So to put myself back, but, to still highlight that it is a tragic issue in a way that, has affected even, with Maui, for example, we see these effects where the way that caused the Maui wildfire wasn't just due to climate change. It was due to people not, cutting the grass that they had that was originally, from colonial, or colonization of the state, when they decided not to feed cows anymore. And they're like, okay, well, we don't want to farm. And, there's a lot of issues at play that I also did learn through social media that attributed to this issue in a way that has boiled over, and people are angry, and rightfully so. And I think it's really a testament to see like almost like a case study of what we are about to see the entire world go through if we don't do anything by 2030.
It's so powerful. So I kind of wanted to end this conversation with a question. I thought about it today, where, we have these conferences like the Youth Assembly, we have this SDG Summit, we have all of these kind of big events where people like Global Citizen, right? Big events where people come together and try to drive action. I had this feeling come over me where I was like, people who are seeing these big events happening, right? They almost see the people that are on the stage almost as, for example, I remember like, Malala, right? She was a huge driver of change. She, and when you look at somebody like that, you're like, wow, well, what is my part, in serving the world? I'm not Malala. You know what I'm saying? It's like, what can I do as youth? Almost like just an everyday person who may not have built a nonprofit or whatever, something that would warrant being on stage at some big conference like this. Like, how can we feel like we're doing something about this? Like it feels like there's like, I was feeling like, people who listen to these podcasts and they listen to these big leaders, right? They're like, wow, these people are doing great work, but what can I do? So that's kind of where I want to leave this podcast, where I want to kind of give people some like actionable items to think about, in this week, to kind of take through their daily lives, to feel like they're doing something, about this.
Right, exactly. The reason why I was looking over in that direction is because I could see the I Am Malala book sitting on my shelf. So it's really it's a coincidental, but it's like one of those serendipitous moments that really captures, the way that hopefully we can live up to the standard of excellence that she has given to all of us as young people and for future generations, because she is such a remarkable and humble person. I had the opportunity to actually listen to her through a Johnson & Johnson event when I was at Caring Crowd. Yeah, and listening to her like live and like literally almost like in person, at the time, it was truly remarkable to hear about how humble she is, because I'm sure she herself would say, I am an ordinary person, and that, living up to that standard of Malala is, very, it's an honor. And also, I would imagine for her, it's also always challenging. So in that way, I don't know if I can, empathize because I am only Rachel. but
Rachel, let me say something though, because you said that I'm only Rachel. To me, I'm like, this is Rachel who is able to who is going to these big conferences, who is able to share her voice, right? She's in the room with people who have power, right? You have power in that sense with your voice. And I'm like, wow, like I would really love to be in that room too, And so for me, you're not just Rachel, you're Rachel that you're doing something, And I'm not saying that I'm not doing anything, but in the sense that, I don't know, like in some ways I look up to you because I'm like she's like, I don't know. I'm like blubbering at this point, but
well, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I don't feel that you're only Rachel, and that's your humbleness coming out, right? That's humble Rachel coming out, but
I could say that, at least because you asked two like really distinct yet important things, which is one, like how can we follow up with like real action? And it is like that individual action that allows us to all of us be somebody like Malala or like Rachel or like Atal, like, it always enables us to do that. And I remember telling my hairstylist like probably like 3 months ago that when we were talking about like civic engagement, she's like, well, at the end of the day, my vote doesn't matter. And I said, don't let anybody ever make you think that you are so small that your voice, your vote doesn't matter, because that's how we lose.
Yeah.
That's how we lose as a society, is when we begin to not just think, but actually believe that our voices don't matter. So I'd say one of the simplest yet effective ways to have actionable steps towards meeting goals is to vote. It really is. Yeah. And to, put some action behind what you want out of life. there's a lot of opportunities to engage with local communities in a way that localizes collective action towards global causes. And, kind of speaking about this from a civic standpoint, I was recently reading Becoming by Michelle Obama. And one of the passages that really stuck with me, and there's two, but one is literally like a very personal one because I played piano when I was very little, living in, this rundown place. I grew up 25 minutes away from her, where she grew up. So that's how close we were. Yeah. In terms of like being crazy. Southside Chicago, Northwest Indiana, like that's how close it was. But, in the way that she talked about moving forward with progress is that it was, I don't know in terms of like, the way that she internalized it, how hard it was, but she did say that with progress comes slow change, but that slow change, that little step still pivots to making big things at the end. I'm sorry, not pivots, but it snowballs into something major. But we just getting that momentum or getting to that next step, even if it just seems linear, like it's just the way that the world is in terms of seeing it, because I do think that our lifespan as people is actually very, very, very short. I mean, certainly speaking of that from like, universal standpoint, we're less than a blink of an eye for like a 90-year lifespan. But I feel that even social media kind of gave at least myself a little bit of this awareness, but I even see it in the way that Mrs. Obama wrote about the idea of progress, is that it just seems slow. And that's because with technology, we can get everything at the tips of our fingers through a mini computer, that we hold in our pockets, that can do literally everything for us practically, except for like literally feed us. That's like, well, I don't know. It could actually
just order some DoorDash.
Yeah, I was gonna say DoorDash. Yeah, everything from, but like we can't chew on the phone. I wouldn't recommend that.
Don't do that.
Yeah. Don't need to be a doctor to say do not eat a phone, but to capture that passage and to capture the way that we can make those small but powerful steps, that voting matters, that getting involved with your community matters, that by literally even just making your own bed matters, because your mental health as an individual affects people around you. And that's something that is certainly
so huge.
Learned.
That's so huge, because your energy propagates and people can feel that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I genuinely believe that is very true. And even just making your bed, can certainly give you like that sense of like, okay, I did something productive today. And I know even though it is like a westernized approach to think about like, at least in terms of like productivity, it's still like makes you feel like I achieved something today. And that's all that matters, is, being able to feel good for yourself. And that also helps relate to others. And not to make this, I guess, too philosophical or too high level, but, those granular steps, like they make a difference, even if it's just for your family. Like, I mean, it matters because, who knows when you have, a Malala to raise, or, a sibling that's a Malala or a Rachel or a Hetal, So that's where I'm going to leave you with.
So good. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Rachel. I'm so happy that we were able to finally make this work, but thank you for what you do. And I'm going to leave your information in the show notes. So if anybody wants to reach out to Rachel, if you want to connect with her, please connect with her. She's doing some really awesome things. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Certainly a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to learn more about today's topic and guest, Head over to the show notes linked in the description of this episode. There, you can get access to resources, links, and ways you can get involved in the pursuit for global health. And if you loved this episode, don't forget to write me a review on Apple Podcasts and rate the podcast on Spotify. It helps me get in front of more people just like you and continues to elevate the causes we are so passionate about. I'll see you in the next one.